Hey guys, my name's Silk. Friends call me Silk. In-game name is SilkWing. I'm just here to give a little bit of feedback to the dev team on Project Nova. And first up, I'm going to chew off probably what's the largest single chunk of feedback I want to give on any game mechanic, and that is with the combat reports. First up, whilst it's not standard in games like this, I quite like the idea that the report is laid out with attacker and defender here, and that's always the same whether you are the attacker or the defender. Usually in games like this, you would find that you get your own personal report, always with yourself over here on the left hand side. That means that you're creating essentially two sets of reports for each instance of a combat, and I'm not sure that that's entirely efficient. So whether that was intentional or not, I quite like the idea of the efficiency, even though it's perhaps a little less user friendly to the old hands who may be coming to try this as a new game. They'll get used to it. I did. It doesn't take much. There were a few initial teething problems, I think, which were fixed sometime during this latest test with these reports. And so now a couple of the other bits of feedback that I had about things where I had a victory appearing as a defeat have now gone. But what I want to have a quick look at now is just going through some of the discrepancies and perhaps even idiosyncrasies of the way in which information is reported. And the first one that comes up really is to do with this information down here at the bottom beneath me. And we have a situation where we are looking at the amount of damage that's been done by one team and the amount of losses that it has received, or the damage it's received, rather than unit losses. Now over here we've got about something around 33,500, in fact 33,505, and that would be correct, damage dealt versus damage received. However, for myself as the defender, what we've got is about 51,500 and something damage done, but only 47,981 received. The reason for that we'll find out on the very next one. I'm just going to reduce myself down here. If we look at the summary, we see something called healing in the middle here. Well, we've done 5,400 on my part, 4,100 odd on Jacob's part. Incidentally, big shout out to Jacob there, my man. Very pleased to have met you in game. What a decent bloke and a great combatant. But if we go back now to the combat report, we'll see that one of these figures takes into account the healing and the other one doesn't. So there's a bit of a minor issue going on there. Another suggestion more than complaint is that it would be really useful with units remaining, units lost, units destroyed, to alternatively consider, I think, having command points, given that, for instance, on my side, which I know reasonably well, a Harpy is worth 4 command points, Tyrannus takes up 2, and Arcos takes up 1. So essentially, I've lost almost the equivalent in Ograx to what I've lost with the Arcos here, because that's actually worth 40. Just something to consider. One of the other issues with this particular summary report is the fact that you're actually just providing identical information under units destroyed and units lost. I suspect that one of these ought to be something from the other side over here, so that you've destroyed 42 but you lost 42 of mine over here. So I would expect to be seeing maybe a 42 over here. I'm not sure. Perhaps it's meant to repeat this over here, but I suspect that actually a couple of these columns have got a little bit mixed up. So I think probably I've destroyed 46 and lost 42, or vice versa over here. Not too sure what's going on. I'll let you guys look into that one. Moving on to the combat log. I'm really probably going to go into the details shortly with this little one up here. If anyone else is watching who's not part of the dev team, this is how you get to the real detailed information about what's going on. I do want to just say I really like this idea of scrolling through here and seeing what's happened by turn in a summary. That is reasonably contemporary for these types of games. I've only seen it in 1 or 2 recently, and one of them very much more recently. It's probably taken them a longer time to get there than it should have, but that's what happens when you switch dev teams over the course of a few years of putting your game out. So big ups, like that very much. We can also note here, as we see things going through, the units destroyed and lost is actually working perfectly well here. So I'm not sure why it's appearing sort of strangely on the overall summary at the end. Let's just flick through to 4 and we'll see where we're at. So total here, now we can see that we're actually reporting correctly with lost and destroyed over here. So that kind of is starting to make some sense now. These are cumulative totals. Okay, and it may simply be that in this summary what we're seeing is a sort of a version of this where we've got, I guess, a sort of cumulative totals, and by the end they might be getting close. I really don't know. Just, guys, have a quick look at that one. Combat, actual detailed combat reports has brought up a whole heap of issues. What I would suggest initially also is to help identify those issues and for players to be able to theory craft really well is to actually put some detail over here as to what some of these things mean. So if we're going to get something like damage dealt is fairly obvious, that's plus 60%. We don't actually know what the damage is necessarily going to be initially, but for certain skills as we go through here we get things that buff ship's power or leadership. Would be really useful to have what the original amount was in detail over here, what the extra, the percentage adds is, and what the total is. It just is going to help us, and we'll see why shortly, because there are basically a number of issues we need to look at with certain skills. The details I'm talking about is here we get detail in here with the amounts of damage done and how many units are lost. That's great, but if we could have that sort of level of detail where we're looking at increases in power and initiative, that would be fantastic too. Now, skills really do need to be looked at. Skills, bearing in mind we're going to have what eventually 40 plus ships, maybe 80 plus strikecraft, I'm not sure, and certainly like 150 different skills. Need to get that nailed, and there tends to be two issues with skills. Either they fire off incorrectly within the code, and someone is disadvantaged as a result of that, or the report is simply not reporting the effects of the skills correctly. And one of those things comes up here, for instance with experienced captain, which is supposed to give my capital ship an additional 1% power and an additional 1% initiative during battle. Well, in fact, what it's telling me here is that the opponent, in this case the attacker, is getting those bonuses on his capital ship and also, strangely, on one of his strikecraft. So if we'd actually had that detail over here, we could see maybe whether that's affecting, in fact, my cipher, or whether that's really affecting the Ember Helm and Ranger on the opposing side. There are a number of these other skills where this occurs. I think from memory, Darkfang has multiple skills where you actually end up buffing the enemy instead of yourself. So that's either seriously disadvantaging the Darkfang, any players playing Darkfang, or it's simply going to be very confusing when you go down to read this detailed level reports, and you're likely to get a whole bunch of complaints about it anyway. So somewhere along the line that kind of needs to get fixed. Just going down here, one other thing that really kind of strikes me, or two other things perhaps, is that everybody gets their normal attacks first, which is great, and then we get skill attacks. But in some instances, we actually end up with getting additional attacks, and I'm trying to find one rapidly here where we have got, let's see, Cipher. Cipher triggers damage dealt plus 30%. But for some strange reason, it's actually giving it an extra attack. All this elemental is supposed to do is increase the standard damage by 30%. Now, I don't know whether or not that 30% is in addition to the attack it's done on Ranger, or whether it's simply an extra attack as well. If we look at something like Assassin launching reduction here, that seems very strange, because that standard attacks 90%. At 90%, prioritize the enemies with the lowest defense. Well, my Assassin has already made an attack here. it's now making an additional attack here. Now nowhere does it say I get 2 attacks for that, and I think that's probably some kind of a mistake there. So, you know, word to the wise, I guess, if you're playing this in a beta or whatever and this is not fixed, go play someone that gets assassins and a cipher and so on available to it, because hey, you're on to a winner and you're going to get a significant advantage. I don't think that's intended. It may well be working across the various factions, ships, and strike-off. Essentially, somebody really needs to sit down and go through all of this and actually test every single ship, every single set of skills, and make sure that they're A, working as intended, and B, being reported in these battle reports as intended. So that's about it for now on this. That's kind of my feedback around there, with one other request for a quality of life improvement. And that is that when I come onto the game, and sometimes even when I've got 7 or 8 different reports come up because I've been hit or hit someone or hit multiple people, and I suddenly want to see a report, it's not defaulting to the most recent one. And so what I want to see, as soon as I come into this report screen, I would like to see the top one shown. And the reason for that is if you're in the middle of a heated battle, you're stuck in a draw, you've got someone flying into you, they're going to land in about 20 seconds. You really want to waste no time at all having a quick look at that report and saying, do I withdraw or do I hold? It's just a quality of life improvement that will seriously help in the heat of battle. There's nothing worse than your players getting frustrated with the fact that they've suddenly lost an important point. They've been battling away for 20 or 30 minutes and they've simply lost because they can't get to their report in time. Those couple of seconds have cost them. So just some quality of life things there. Overall, really happy. So don't get me wrong, really happy just trying to provide useful feedback. But I think there's quite a way to go with these combat reports and perhaps even combat in itself. So thanks very much for listening. Always happy to be hit up in Discord. Username is SilkWing, all lowercase. That's fine. Give me a shout if you want more. Cheers.